some other state of California jobs that these folks have obtained. So I follow up with them. I help them obtain employment within my program. All of my students are required to complete a professional portfolio, including a cover letter, resume, all their certifications, and letters of recommendations from me. I go through interviewing techniques with them to help them along that line. I will say that I have a lot of support from my administration, my principal, vice principal. I have a lot of support from custody and as well as the wardens, past and present. I've had substantial increases in my TABE scores as a result. I do teach math, English, writing within the scope of my program. I have a waiting list of about 42 on the list to get into automotive. I don't have disciplinary issues in my program. I've never had a fight at all in 6 years being there. I will tell you I do have a little bit of an issue getting a few that turn out to not be engaged in it off the roll sheet. It takes about anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to do that. It's been a problem. I will say I do have community support from Shasta College. I have support from some of the auto dismantlers, pick and pull. I have a cooperative agreement with them right now to take in vehicles from pick and pull. My students are going through those vehicles, and then we're donating them to the needy. And that program is underway right now. I also have public donations for my program, vehicles and so forth. A lot of the funding that I've had to come up with, I've had to do creatively. If it wasn't for VITA, my program wouldn't exist. VITA is the vocational education technical something. It's federal funding. If it wasn't for particularly Ron Callison at OCE specifically, and I owe a lot to that man because my program would not be in existence if it wasn't for him. He's since retired, unfortunately. We lost a great guy. I have a very, very good relationship with inmate assignments, and the reason that I contribute a part of the success is that I handpick my my students. The few times that some guys have fall through the cracks and I haven't interviewed them are usually the ones that I end up trying to get off the roll sheets because they don't have what it takes. They're not interested, whatever the case may be. If I do have a problem with the inmate in the past, I've been able to make a call to inmate assignments and working with custody, have them removed. In the last couple of years, it's gotten really, really difficult to do that. Usually the way I do it, inmate assignments, I'll have a student that's interested. He'll ask for an interview, and I'll reserve a time in the day, usually towards the back end of the day, to have him come down to the gate. And I'll interview him and ask him questions and so forth. I'll make my notes and then send it back up to inmate assignments and say, if we can get this guy in on the next available opening, let's do it. So I've had to kind of go outside and get creative outside the scope of normalcy to get things done. I've had to do that financially. I've had to do that within the curriculum. I do want to let you know that in the automotive trades within the Department of CDCR, there's a problem that CDCR is not aware of right now, and that is that the state of California, starting January 1st of 2013, moves to a program called STAR. That program stands for Station Technician Achievement Rating. Every technician in the state of California is going to be graded and scored. That score rating is going to be from 0 to 1.0, with 0.5 being the average. Any technician falling at 0.4 or less is no longer employable as a smog technician drivability. They're out. That program launches January 1st of 2013. So these students that are coming through the program not only have to meet the curriculum, but they have to meet beyond the curriculum in order to be marketable. The curriculum itself is not in my program or in automotive is not up to speed. It doesn't reflect current technologies. They're behind. I've had to go beyond. I teach the curriculum, but I teach beyond it. One last thing, one key point. is there is we have lost ASC certifications within Department of Corrections. ASC stands for Automotive Service Excellence. It is the gateway of which all industry technicians must possess that certification. It's an industry, their industry test is what they are. And we have lost that in the Department of Corrections, primarily due to ASC moving to computer-based training, number one, and number two, they have complained that it's difficult to get reimbursed for the tests, and there were test security issues. I had specifically written Julie White, who's the director of ASC, on a long-time basis with her, friendship, and wrote her a letter asking for us to be able to move into a computer-based environment to which we could link up with ASC to continue this. They were kind of reluctant to do that because of the security issues. ASC needs to be restored if these technicians are going to be marketable on the outside.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Shall I go next? Counterclockwise.
Is that the table?
Good job.
Yes, it is.
Good job as usual. I'm Tom Bolema. Thanks for having us here today and hearing us. I work at San Quentin now. I've been there for about 6 years. I've been in the business for about 12. 6 years prior to that, I was in Lancaster, so I have a real good perspective on going from like a level 3-4 institution to San Quentin, which is mythologically famous for its programming, right? So there I do the VEP program, and I've been doing that sort of thing even at Lancaster, on and off, back with independent, what they call it, independent study, distance learning. We were in the process of setting up television systems back even that soon ago. Within the last 10 years, it's really progressed a lot. All the institutions now have television specialists. So it's really advanced, as Ms. Sigan was saying, it's really advanced we can really handle a lot more students with that sort of thing. I think I can probably speak best on that sort of program when it comes to the question sessions. At San Quentin, I am also involved with the San Quentin newspaper, which I would encourage everybody to. You can go online, sanquentinnews.com, and check that out. I think it's a really great venue we welcome writers from everywhere and so on, but it's an inmate-produced thing with really great sponsors. It's a good way to publicize programs and so on. I have a little column in there where I interview folks like you. I'd like to do that soon and spread the word around the state. We have excellent volunteer programs there. I think there's a total of 4,000 volunteers coming into San Quentin, so the community resource specialist has her hands extremely full. I sponsor one group, which is a literacy-based group called REACH, and I have to go to the ADSEG units, which, as Ms. Siggins was saying, we're trying to get into those areas. I get a lot of requests from those sort of areas, which sometimes we can handle and sometimes we can't. It seems like the custody side of things isn't really ready yet for us to go with these sort of, I don't want to say revolutionary programs, but progressive type of programs to reach as many people as possible before they leave. Also going to the condemned unit, and it's very interesting how it goes up there. I've had people up there tell me, if I had had this before I did my crime, I wouldn't have done it. So we're always, it doesn't end at prison, it doesn't begin there, and it doesn't end there. When we talk about people going out and what they've achieved while they're in, and can we get them to achieve something before they leave? For some program that's really relevant, but for probably the majority of the inmates, they're not going to do it inside. But that doesn't mean we ignore them while they're in there. So that's where programs like VEP can really reach out and get people. And I don't think you should put limits on these kinds of things. If the guy's there he says, I'm there for another 2 weeks, can I come in your program? My principal is say, don't do anybody less than 90 days. I got a guy standing in front of me that's begging for some math help because when he gets home, he's going to go to that adult school. Oh yeah, I'm going to help him. I'm going to enroll him. So we have a lot to talk about. I'll leave it at that.
Hi, my name is Cindy Greer, and I work at Valley State Prison for Women. I want to just a couple inconsistencies or on Ms. Higgins' presentation. The compass, I know they're trying to use it, but at Valley State Prison for Women, it's voluntary for the inmates to take it, so it's something that's not addressed all the time for their needs at this point at that institution. The other point I always have contention with is with the LAO always saying that our funding should be based on attendance, when with the voluntary education program with enrollment now, there are so many factors that play into that, like Ms. Higgins said, that until there are substitute or relief teachers and our program is more modeled after a public school system, attendance is not a good way to look at funding us. So if you ever want to talk about that, I just wanted to throw that in there because they bring that up all the time and it's not practical. At Valley State Prison for Women, I am the first volunteer education coordinator that they had, and we had 3, back down to 2, and we just this month got back up to 3. I want to talk to you about training inmates. We don't have the volunteers that San Quentin does, so we train our inmates as a resource to be tutors and work with the population in the housing units. We currently have 24 tutor positions. That's going to increase to 29 in the first of the year as our reception center is leaving and we're becoming more GP. Our tutors work with 10 students on a one-to-one basis with a 9.0 TABE or below. So every tutor is responsible for 10 students. They're to meet with them twice a week for an hour apiece, say once on reading, once on math.
What does 9 point mean?
Ninth grade reading level.
Okay, gotcha.
Ninth grade reading level or below are the tutors' focus. Then they have an evening hour slot from 6:30 to 7:30 that they are to work in the game rooms with TV programming coming in or book club selections that they're working with, making literacy more involved and more fun and increasing their vocabulary to help all of them. So they're either doing GED study groups or book clubs in the evening times. The training that my tutors receive is the pro-literacy training, which pro-literacy is 2 literacy organizations that merge together, and it incorporates the Laubach method of reading, and it's internationally known. It is a 15-hour course of training that my tutors receive, and they get 5 3-hour sessions. So I have those broken down into different segments that we could discuss at another time. Once they get that initial training, they're given a certificate, a Laubach certificate that is recognized for any organization that uses that tutoring method. The problem with the volunteer education program is that OCE has a handbook that they've given the institutions to implement this program, and implementation is up to each individual site to implement the way they see fit, which is good if you have an encouraging and a supportive administration like I do. There are horror stories in a few instances where this is being used as a place to capture those CASAS benchmarks, those CASAS milestones, by just testing and retesting and not really getting the tutor training done. So I know there's room for improvement. This program has made it under the wire when all these new models started. It's never been a talking point. We've asked as the union to meet with the department to talk about some guidelines and some parameters for all these literacy coordinators because it's so different up and down the state, and that has not happened yet. Back to my site, the tutors are also responsible, the MA tutors are responsible for recruiting students. They come and we duck at them to come meet with us once a week, the coordinators, and then we see them an additional time a week in the housing units. So we've built up rapport with our tutors, we've built up rapport with custody housing staff, and we had 0 furniture in the game rooms where they really work with the students to having these site literacy meetings with our administration higher up, getting desks that we weren't using because our programs had been reduced, getting those delivered to each game room. So each game room now has 10, and it looks like school, so that helped the officers and the other people see, oh, we've got school going on. So that really helped a lot. The volunteer education program is great for self-starting students. It's great for students with special needs who don't do well in a classroom setting and need that one-to-one instruction. However, my tutors are not credentialed teachers, and this program cannot take the place of all classroom instruction. So we're working on, and I believe the department's working on, trying to find a balance of how our school should look like with classroom and voluntary programs. But our in-class programs are still very important because some students do better with that type of everyday instruction instead of meeting twice a week. The paperwork and accounting tasks are monumental, and the cuts are so deep to our education staffing, it is difficult to keep up with that. I have to keep a roster that takes a lot of clerical. I can't really have an inmate do that because I can't have her being paid without me knowing it to put certain people on here to have more of a chance to earn those milestones. So we have to look at getting some more clerical support with staff somehow. Since this program's been started at Valley State Prison, we've helped over 150 students get gains, either those CASAS or TABE gains or GED completions.
Excuse me, I missed that.
Over 150? Wow. Just with our volunteer program. The problems statewide is that it's still inconsistent throughout the institutions, and that's because you've got these schools up and down the state and principals doing different things. So the training's not the same. We don't have the staff support we need because of all the cuts. The GED testing is not uniform. We are our own testing center. We were approved to do that. And we have a policy, if they're a 7.0 or above, they can take the pre-GED test because that doesn't cost anything for a testing person to give that. If those students do well on that, they can go ahead and do the official if they meet the certain marks to look like they would be successful. The problem is that a lot of other institutions don't let them test until they're at a 9.0 or even some extreme cases to a 12.9. So these are some things that we need to address. I have a high tutor turnover rate. You hear about teacher burnout. In the year I've been running this program, I've had an 80% tutor turnover. That's very high. It takes a lot of energy and motivation to get them to be involved because they get pulled by custody, not letting them use the game room when they're supposed to. They don't remember the skills, or it's much more intensive working with people than they thought it was going to be. And I use an interview process to hire them, so it's very difficult to keep good tutors. The programming during modified program, when we're locked down but it's not an emergency situation like fog, the students aren't being allowed and the tutors aren't being allowed to come out and work, so we're working on that. And we just had a VP coordinator position that just got filled, so we hoped, and that will increase our college participation because that coordinator is going to focus more on the college. The improvements, we have a much improved rapport with custody staff. I go to the unit classification committee meeting weekly, and the volunteer coordinators, that's part of their job, is to go to the classification committees weekly. So I spend 1 day a week in classification and then in my housing units to see the tutors. So I'm getting to know the staff, and that's helping tremendously. Working with our testing coordinators that were left in place to make sure that we're targeting those students that need to be tested with close release dates so that we pick up some more before they get out to try to give them a GED to help them with job possibilities. My inmate tutors are paid. In some instances, they're not. So we need to address and make sure that that gets unified because being a paid position makes it much more conducive to keeping them. Even 80% turnover with the pay is hard. The consistency needs to be found in the tutor training and the job requirements and the caps of students for the coordinators. And we need to establish those uniform GED testing standards.
Thank you. And if you have specific suggestions like that, all of you, if you would just jot them down on a piece of paper and make sure we have them.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm Marie Stortz. I'm from CRC down in Norco, California. It's a men's prison. And I'm an academic teacher. I've also taught at CIW, it's a women's prison. And so I have taught all the levels, ABE 1, 2, 3, and currently I had GED. My GED class was just shut down because we had 2 teachers retire, and they closed my class down and put me in there into a spot where a teacher was leaving. So now we have no GED class. And I'm going to just repeat what Cindy says. The volunteer program is a great alternative to the wait lists. and it gives us flexibility for all these students awaiting to get assigned into class. But it's certainly not a replacement for the regular classrooms, especially GED. My prison is very different from her prison, so I'm kind of going to be the dissenter. Our literacy program there is pushing completions. These teachers were told that they were going to be measured by the number of completions. So it has become a little bit of a GED, CASAS point, TAPE point, increase all the milestones. It's geared that way more than hers. Hers is set up a lot better. She's getting a lot of support. We don't have that at our institution. So we have problems. But what I want to specifically address is the inmate assignments issue and the attendance. The inmates' assignments is handled by custody. And we have, at my institution, I just took a count of several teachers right before I left. I have 51% incorrectly assigned students to an ABE2 class. I have a 30% on another AB2 class, and I have an 81% on an ABE3 class. These are misassigned students. They're in the wrong class. This becomes a big issue for the teachers. One is it does create an unsafe condition when you have a great number of low-performing students in a high class. What happens is they struggle. And as they struggle, they become frustrated and they become discipline problems. Okay, because they're at the wrong literacy level. And then the teacher tries to split their time between addressing the lower level and addressing the literacy level that she's been assigned. So it becomes a big safety issue if you get also too many of a lower student level, literacy level. Okay, and then you have a great deal of the same minority. If you have a great deal of minority students at a low level in a class, it's a prison, they try to control the classroom. And they do this through intimidation of the teacher and the staff. So it is a safety issue also that these students get assigned to the correct class. They're just acting out because they're in a class that's too high for them, they're struggling, they can't get enough attention because the teacher has to split her time among the different levels. So that it is a security issue. We have also at our facility, both the teachers and the students have become very frustrated at the inefficient processing of the milestone credits and assigning the correct student to the correct class. And this causes a lot of dissension. We can't get our students transferred to the correct class. They sit on wait lists for a great deal of time. So we can't even get them to the right class. So it causes a lot of problems. It does cause a safety issue. And just a suggested remedy, I was just saying a suggested remedy that they do need to change it. You need to have education in charge of assigning those students. Not the crossing guard, but the teachers. They need to be in charge of assigning those students. We need to redo the procedures on that so that education is control of education. And this is going to be more critical now that the DJJ students, the 18-year-olds, are going to come over into the adult institutions. If you assign those students into the wrong area, they're going to lose, just speaking as a teacher in a classroom, they're going to become victims. They're 18-year-olds in an adult institution. You need to get them into class. You need to emphasize their education and push them through. You don't need to be putting them on a wait list and shoving them as a porter or a clerk somewhere. You need to keep them in school. You need to continue their education because it's critical at that point and at that age. Also, I was going to address here some of the reasons why the attendance is so high. I was listening to what you were saying. Very good. The reason the attendance is so high is partly because of the software that we track. Let's say a teacher is absent for the day. There are no replacements, like she said. But let's say we go to a doctor's appointment at the end of the day, and the students are documented as two hours of class time, 1 hour of absent excuse time. That escalates the absent time in the documentation. Okay? So they also, another thing that the housing and assignment does is they duck at these students out of class during their class time instead of doing it at a time that they're not in class. So they're going out for dentists, they're going for dental appointments, they're going to the consular, they're going to all these ducats during class time. So we have to mark them out of the class. That escalates your absent time. Unlock times in the morning or in the afternoon before they come to class. Some of the times they're not getting out of their units. So if the guard doesn't let them out of the unit to come to class, they don't get to class. And so we mark them absent because they're not there. That escalates the absent time. So there are a number of issues that are making those figures so high, and that has to do with an efficient way of running the operation. Again, I'm going to emphasize that education needs to be in charge of assigning those inmates and controlling what's going on in education. Somebody needs to be assigned, and I'm just going to suggest this, that you either create a position or take a position from within education and make that person in charge of inmate assignments and give them the authorization over custody to do it. So there are a number of problems, and I know that you're going to have questions, but I'm just going to say that part for the academic side.
Okay, thank you all very much. Joel, Senator Anderson, did you have any questions?
No, at this time. Thank you, though.
Okay. Well, I do have a few questions, and thank you. This is so interesting just to see where we might go. It does seem to me that there's some particular things that might be thought about. And I'm really saying this to the department. I don't know if you would have a response at this point, Ms. Siggins, if you would want to come up and talk about it and everything, but just things, these are things that occurred to me sitting here. What would be the problem with teachers interviewing people on the waiting list if there was a vacancy and doing like a decision memo, which is an easy way to get things done, at least in the federal government where I used to work. You just have a thing and you say, for this reason, we think this person would be the right one, check yes or no. And then it's over with. You don't have to involve a lot of people spending a lot of time on everything. Then when I was listening to Ms. Stortz, I was thinking, even if you had one teacher, one custody, one admin, I'm trying to think, what would you want to know about a student? You'd want to know the appropriate academic placement. You'd want to know if there were any security risk things that have played out, in their cell block. And an administrator might know that they're due to be released in 2 weeks, so that wouldn't be appropriate. But something, again, that could lead to a quick and easy transfer with the teacher making some decisions about a personality who might be able to, even if a class was moving ahead, somebody that could come in at the right level. I think all of that is things that should be explored, and I think as we look at the data on assignments and all of that, it would be something we definitely need to come back to. To me, that's one thing. Another is the business of having substitute teachers. Because if the money is allocated for X number of teachers, and if part of the reason money is left over at the end is that if the teacher's out, there's no sub, there's a lot of teachers losing their jobs right now because of the cutbacks in education. That's all I'm going to say. I think there are human beings that would like to do that work and fill those slots.
Does that also include substitutes for vocational programs
definitely.
as well? Because historically, vocation has always been excluded from that process. I've asked for a substitute because of the complexity of my program and the mere size of it. I could use an extra hand, and I've been told that my program as a voc program doesn't qualify for it.
Well, another thing that's of great interest to me is how we begin to merge these silos, because for many students, the doorway to academic learning can be that they want to learn something else, and they're interested in that, and there's no.
There needs to be continuity as they
Yeah.
Are able to reach those reading levels that they could read the textbooks to be able to go into those vocational programs. I understand the funding's not there to increase teachers. My point was with substitutes is that we have it forced down our throats that we have to try and get our attendance up and don't miss time from work, and things happen. And they've never modeled us. My own principal at one time had he allocated his staffing where we did have substitutes one year, and we got those numbers on that slide up to 75% attendance, because when teachers were gone, there was someone to be in there. And in voc programs across the state at different times, there have been relief instructors at some institutions. That's what helps bring those numbers up.
That's exactly right.
And I know the funding's not there to increase that. All I'm saying is that the LAO is not going to get that number up if we can't fund it on attendance, because we don't fit that model. Right. We've never consistently done that. But if you go back and look at the records of the school I work at, when my own principal took that choice to do that until he got told he couldn't do that anymore, we had a year where if we got it up to 80%, he was going to buy us all pizza. We were really hoping for that, but it got cut off before we quite met that mark.
Well, I appreciate that, and I was actually going to say that I think that the model you're using of inmates as tutors is really exciting.
It is.
And I think that given the huge need, and that we're not going to be expanding the credentialed teacher force anywhere near meeting the need anytime soon, that it's a great thing to use, even as we know that you've got to have the credentialed teachers there on some ratio to run a program, right? But to me, that's very exciting, again, because in my work in education, one of the things that's been proved to actually be very effective is to have slightly older students tutoring students a grade or so below them. Turns out the reading scores of both groups of students go up.
That is true.
And the younger students look up to the older students. The older students feel like they're important, and a lot of life skills are taught this way too, in terms of responsibility and all of that, compassion, whatever. So to me, this is a really great model, and I'd like to see how that could be expanded.
And it is changing and growing, and like we have 520 between the 3 yards, and we're expanding to a 4th yard in January. So there's about 520 between the 3 yards and the college, over 100 college folks that are participating right now, with only 3 instructors to run it. So it's like running a separate mini school aside from the classroom school. So as this evolves, we want to maintain quality, because that's where those marks increase and the self-esteem and all of the job skills grow and get them into the voc programs. To do that, we really have to watch and make sure we have some support staff somehow along the way, whether it be an OA or something, to help keep these rosters and help with the background support that needs to happen. Because it is like running a whole nother mini school.
I can definitely see that. You know, you guys, in the interest of time, because also Senator Anderson and I have another hearing coming up, I think we should hear the substance abuse.
Yes, thank you for your time so much.
Tell us anything additional that comes to you, okay? Afterwards. Thank you very, very much for taking the time to be here. Sean Jenkins and David Cohn. Mr. Jenkins is the Regional Vice President of WestCare, Inc., working in substance abuse issues, and David Cohn of Mental Health Systems, Inc. And you're going to talk about the programs and realignment a little bit with us.
Thank you, Senators. We appreciate the time. As you said, I'm Sean Jenkins with WestCare California, Inc. We offer a number of programs to CDCR, provide the services not only in California but in a number of states. And one of the things I want to talk about is, while AB 109 took effect in October, First, with the shift of lower level inmates to counties, the treatment model that CDCR took over a decade to build has slowly been eroded over the last couple of years, and you've seen that in the slides that Ms. Siggins has shown. We've gone from a little over 1,200 beds in 21 institutions at 47 different yards to about 1,500 beds in 13 institutions, and I think Ms. Siggins'
You have
slides.
more beds.
12,000, I'm sorry. We went from 12,000 beds
Gotcha.
to 1,500. And I think Ms. Siggins' slide showed 35, but that includes I believe the ICDTP, which is the jail-based treatment programs. They're shutting down the 3 Family Foundations program, which provides pregnant and perinatal treatment programs for women with their children. The Santa Fe Springs has already shut down. The San Diego program scheduled to shut down March 31st of 2012, and the Fresno program scheduled to close June 30th, 2012. There's been some changes in some of the RFPs that have made it difficult for current vendors to even rebid on their current projects because they've put in some stipulations that you can't be so close to a park or so close to a school. And these, I can only assume they're geared to allow sex offenders into the program, and I'm specifically talking
State
about...
law initiative.
Okay.
Other.
I'm specifically talking about the RMS residential multi-service programs and the Pearly Service Centers, and I think the Pearly Service Center had a couple of projects that were bid out that nobody bid on them just because if they're going to allow sex offenders in there. And there isn't really any evidence that says that these programs really provide the type of service that are needed for sex offenders, and they're not effective. I don't want to say over the last few years everything's been negative because I believe on the positive note the states continue to fund the SASCAs and the FOTEPs, and the SASCA is the Substance Abuse Coordinating Agency, which is actually the aftercare arm. And I think that without that, a lot of community capacity would be lost, and capacity that we'll never get back because of conditional use permits and whatnot. Once these programs are shut down, they'll lose capacity, and that available capacity in the community will either take years to get back or will never come back at all. I also commend the department from changing from a 90-day model to a 5-month model. The 90-day model for the in-prison treatment program was too short. I believe the counties will step up with AB 109, but I think it's going to take them time. They're not ready right now.
You mean realignment?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
There's several counties that don't even have RFPs out on the table yet. And I think it's going to take them a while to learn some of the lessons that CDC already learned. One of them is that residential treatment with a step down into outpatient is most effective. A lot of counties are going to push a bunch of people into outpatient treatment. They're probably not going to be effective. They're going to fail. It's going to take them time to learn that lesson, and when they see the budget implications of that, of reincarcerating these people locally over and over and over, they're going to have to take a change. I think that there are some ways that we can look at helping in this time of transition. One is to continue the full funding for the SASCAs and the FOTEP programs. I think that there could be consideration for contract extensions on the current contracts that are out there for 1 year to allow, the counties to fully implement AB 109 and allow CDCR to really assess where they're at with the inmate population and the parole population that they have left to make sure that the programs best meet the needs of the inmates and the parolees. I think that we need to look at, and I think Ms. Siggins talked about the right person in the right program, look at the current location of the in-prison treatment programs and make sure that we have the population there to fill the programs on those yards, and a population that's going to be eligible for aftercare, because that's where we get the success, if they're eligible for aftercare. I think that re-looking at some of these RFPs and maybe restricting them and not having sex offenders in programs that weren't designed for sex offenders. And if there's a need for sex offender treatment program, which I believe there are, RFP out those specific services so that those services could be tailored towards the sex offenders. And lastly, and I don't know if this is possible, but allow the SASCs and FOTEPs to provide some services to AB 109 participants in the event that there are available funds left. Because a lot of the funds right now, especially in this first year, are being used for jail capacity and probation, and it is a very small amount for treatment. And I think that bridge is going to be hard to get past. In closing, I'd just like to say, I commend this committee for taking up these issues. I also want to commend the Office of Offender Services. I think that they've been proactive. They've been really on the side of treatment and trying to push more treatment in troubled budget times. And I think also the community-based providers that have provided services inside the institution and in the community have stepped up every time they've been asked in a change in the system. I think that really the goal here is to try to rehabilitate the offenders that are coming out, get them back, get them employable, and get them to be taxpayers instead of tax takers. Thank you.
All right. In the interest of time, my comments are in writing, and I will keep it brief because most everything I want to say, either Ms. Higgins or Sean has just said. I will use FOTEP as an example. FOTEP was designed as a regional network of gender-responsive programs specifically for females. And it was partly based on the fact that a lot of counties are too small to develop those services on their own. And some counties have implemented evidence-based practices for 109 realignment, by which they have imposed use of curriculum which has been tested only on male offenders, never on female offenders. So counties have some catch-up to do with the state in terms of what it means to be gender responsive. So if it would be possible to allow the FOTEP programs to serve the realigned offenders who used to be eligible for the services and are not now, that might give a better bridge for the counties to learn what they want to do on this population. The same is true for SASCA services as well. And it would also allow the conditional use permits to be maintained. Last year in January, we asked that the aftercare funding for community-based providers not be cut on a one-time basis because that would allow the conditional use permits to be preserved. And we're happy to say that worked, but right now they're in jeopardy again because the offenders are being put into different silos. Okay, and with that, I understand we're out of time, so I'll get it.
Wow. Self-discipline.
Excellent.
Senator Anderson, do you have any questions or comments?
Other than thank you for keeping your comments limited and so succinct. Thank you.
Well, I do have a couple. Ms. Higgins, could you just come up too? Because it would basically extending the additional the money for the community-based programs does seem to be important. I'm very concerned about how that's going to fall out in the whole picture. And we did have to work very hard to figure out how to maintain them. This was a problem that I actually found out about only because a former legislator is on the board of a program in Stockton that was going to close after many years, and he said this can't happen, but it turned out it's something that is going to affect programs all over the state. And as we know, it's very hard to cite programs, it's very hard to build them. If the conditional use permit goes away, if there's a collapse of some kind, it's not going to come back right away. So how do you see that aftercare piece playing in? Do you think we could fix that in the budget in some way? Or?
Well, it's not a problem yet. I think what everyone is worried about is what happens as the parole population goes down. Can CDCR continue to justify having as many beds as we currently do? So part of what we're in the process right now in terms of is evaluating what we do actually need. We do know, I mean, as I suggested earlier, the significant drop in parole is in 2 years out. So, I mean, so what we are looking at is being able to do some sort of a bridge like what they're talking about. I could not right now commit that we won't make any reductions next year, but we are absolutely looking at, what is it that we will need and how do we communicate that both with the providers and with the counties so that the counties do have ample time to pick that up. So in philosophy, we're all on the same page. The question is how it will play out in reality.
Okay, great. Then another question. Both of you run aftercare programs, right?
Yes.
You don't run in-prison programs.
I do not at this point. Actually, I do the Female Rehabilitative Community Correctional Center in Bakersfield.
And then we operate the Family Foundations program in Fresno and the Family Foundations program in San Diego, and then we offer correctional programs in other states.
Okay. What does an in-prison drug abuse program look like, since presumably there isn't access to drugs in prison?
Most of the treatment is actually about what Elizabeth described earlier. The cognitive behavioral models that are used by criminals are different than those used by citizens, so we have to teach them to use a different decision model. And so the thinking for change. Yes. Right. That's the primary method.
Okay. What are they doing in men's prison?
Well, that is in the men's prison. We operate the Family Foundations programs, and they're a gender-responsive, trauma-informed program. We offer the Seeking Safety, a lot of the other Stephanie Covington curriculum designed to be gender-responsive and trauma-informed towards the women. And then they also have their children there. So not only their women are working on their issues, but we're doing assessment on the children, seeing where they're at for their age and stage for learning, doing treatment plans for them, doing bonding and parenting with the women so that they can take care of their children when they get out.
And counties do have needs for those services. They just don't know it yet.
Some of them do and some of them don't. But yeah, you're right. Well, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
I just wondered, Ms. Higgins, if you had any comments on some of the transfer and assignment issues that came up in the teaching panel.
Sure. Really briefly, I think that the kind of situation that you were recommending where a teacher would sit down with also a custody officer, I mean, that is what our classification committee is supposed to be. And so that is the process that we need to make sure works. I think as they talked about with the vocational programs, they do sometimes have the opportunity to specifically have that teacher interview the inmate. I think what we don't want to do is create a system that ends up taking more time than we currently have. And of course, we don't want placement into education programs to be based solely on inmate needs or desires. We do want it to be based in part on the risk, the time left to serve, et cetera. So I think the issue is how do we make the classification committee, which does have representatives from education as well as custody as well as other factions.
On one?
I'd have to get back to you with more information.
Because it just seems to me there ought to be a way to that it wouldn't be inmate desires as much as teacher evaluation of who would fit into the group.
I think the problem is keeping in mind that the classification committee has to take in many other issues into consideration as well, not just the educational needs, but they have to take, so that's where they deal with all of the other issues as well. So we wouldn't want to necessarily set up a separate meeting for education on top of what's already happening in classification, because then you could end up at cross purposes.
Okay. I think we better... I agree that you want to streamline it, that you want to... It seems like, though, we're ending up with a lot of wasted money in the sense that there's slots going unfilled because of the difficulty of having timely decisions made on this, and that having a process in which teachers are in the driver's seat, the conditions of when a person's going to be released and if there's a security risk in the yard that they're on are taken into account. There ought to be a way to speed it up.
I think what we can do is get a group of folks to come back and follow up specifically with you and bring some of the the folks from SEIU to talk about it together.
Like if you guys sat down, I bet you could come up with something that everybody would like. Okay. Thank you all very, very much. Really, we've learned a lot, and we're going to really be using this as we try to make some of the very tough decisions that we're going to have to make. Thank you all. Oh, were we going to have comments from the public? Yes. Well, are there any comments from the public? If there are any people here who have something they really, really want to add, I thought you might.
There's a threat.
But we do have a hearing that's going to be starting momentarily. I believe, yes. So we do get up to walk around a little bit.
Not to worry, Senator. Your subtlety was not lost on me. My name is David Warren, Senators, and I don't think we've ever had the pleasures. As you can see, Senator Hancock has seen me many times before Public Safety Committee. I was a volunteer in the state prison as a Jewish chaplain for many years. And the reason I came today is because, with all due respect to the Department of Corrections, they've missed the point dramatically. The inmates don't seem to have a person that comes to speak here. You have people who are professionals who are saying, this is what we want to do, but you do not have the inmates having someone to speak for them and the failures that they are experiencing. I think SADF is the classic example. Excuse me, I'm coming down with the cold. The inmates are saying, I'm going as a joke, but I'm going because I'm ordered to go. The Prison Industry Authority, which is a major expense to the state, is teaching skills that are no longer marketable in the public. A meat cutter is no longer a major job. It's all done in massive plants in the Midwest. An inmate who leaves the prison can't get a job. They can't get printing jobs anymore. We do not teach marketable skills in our prison system. Also, as a Jewish chaplain, because of the massive layoffs, I taught literacy. As part of religious service, I taught reading and writing because the teachers, not because they're bad, but because of lack of time and space, and because of inmate interference. Classic example, when I was scheduled to do Yom Kippur services, the Aryan Brotherhood decided they were going to put the yard down so the Jewish inmates didn't come to service. If there's a group that wants to interfere with programming, all they've got to do is cause a ruckus, and the yard goes down and inmates cannot get there. But the biggest problem is funding. And recently, Grover Norquist, former House of Representatives Speaker Gingrich, and William Bennett, the former SAR for drug enforcement, made the point that instead of incarcerating those we're afraid of, we've got to put those who are going to reoffend in prison. We need to change the paradigm, who we have in custody, so that we can afford to pay for the rehabilitation programs. The realignment is causing a significant problem because I just want to use this as one example. The way I became involved in this in my former life was did 187 defense as an attorney. I represented a person who I felt was wrongly convicted. No big thing. She's been in custody now for 21 years. She's about to leave prison in 22 months. In all that time, she's never been able to have access to a GED class. She's finally getting to go there. Couldn't go to college because she couldn't complete a GED. But it's not because she can't read. The testing to determine whether or not you should go to class is reading only. It has nothing to do with arithmetic. And she can't do basic arithmetic. We have failed the inmates in this manner. Proposed solution: we need more money in order to solve the inmate education problem. First, I have provided Ms. Vang with 3 recent periodical articles. Number 1, we have, according to the SCAP reports, approximately 30,000 foreign nationals in our state prison system. Although I may sound xenophobic, I'm really not. Both my parents came to this country illegally as Holocaust survivors. I understand the problem of undocumented individuals. But people who come to this country and commit felonies should be sent to the feds for deportation. We should not spend our money incarcerating them. If we sent back 10,000 people times $50,000 a year, just think of how much money we'd have for primary and secondary education. Number two, we need to take a look at our lifers and decide who we really want to keep inside. More than 10,000 have exceeded their stay in prison. Number three, we have approximately 4,800 extraordinarily sick inmates. 2,300 of them will soon be housed in a new prison facility. The other 2,500 are costing the state between $150,000 and $1 million a year to treat. Why are we doing that when we could be having them outside in medical facilities? They alone would close part of the budget deficit that we need for primary and secondary education in California and still have money left over to fully fund the $250 million amount that was removed from rehabilitation programming in the state prison system. I ask you to ask the department for this following specific statistics because you're going to be surprised. They're part of the CROB report, and Ms. Hancock, you'll find almost all the information you want in the most of our statistics in the latest CROB report. But we need to ask the following question. On each day, how many actual seats are available for drug rehab, education, and vocation? Then, after we ask that, how many actually are allowed to participate on that day? Because some students only go 1 day a week if there's no lockdown. Some students go 3 days a week if there's no interference. Last, but certainly not least, let's look at the actual number of successful completions of each program. Vocational programs have an extraordinary success rate. I know because I was a chaplain and I talked to all those inmates. SATF programs have an extraordinary failure rate, not because of the instructors, but because there's a lack of internal motivation. I'd like to suggest one last thing, and that is the biggest obstacle to volunteers in the state prison system is the DOM. I have been in 26 of the 32 prisons as a volunteer Jewish chaplain. But because I visit an inmate in one prison, I can no longer go into that prison as a volunteer, even though I was the only Jewish chaplain they had until they could find someone who would accept such a low amount of pay to be the Jewish chaplain. There's something wrong with the volunteer system, and it needs to be reexamined because the people who have a real interest in volunteering are those who have family or had family inside the prison. Thank you very much.
I think that does conclude our hearing. Again, thank you so much. We'll be revisiting all of these issues in just a few weeks when the governor's budget comes out. Thank you. And I'd like to invite any of you who are interested to move over to the John Burton hearing room where we're going to begin a hearing in about 20 minutes.
Thanks very much for your question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but yeah.
You know what? I so much for listening to us.
Oh, thank you.
So much more to tell.
Fabulous. No. Keep the energy going. Those were very good, concrete ideas.